Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are Bavarians from the Napoleonic Wars from some point between 1806 to 1813, and we'll briefly touch on that in a moment. Now these fellas, I haven't painted them all today. They are part of a collection that I've been slowly working on, sort of behind the scenes. But there is one fella that I've painted today where I'm going to show you the actual method. Now I have already done Bavarians on the channel once before, but here's the thing. I do occasionally get things wrong, and definitely the color on the jackets, I have previously made mistakes. It is darker than I have shown previously, so let's go back, correct that mistake. As well, I just think this method is a little bit easier, and it does give a much better looking result. So, all of the paints, as always, will be listed in the description. Let's get started. So today we're going to briefly start with what I think is a first for the channel, which is a book recommendation. This here, as you can probably see, the incredibly imaginatively titled The Bavarian Army, 1806 to 1813. Now this concerns the portion of the Napoleonic period when Bavaria was allied with the French. After the retreat from, the disastrous retreat from Moscow, the Bavarian army was just shattered, and it was then that they would essentially decide, maybe our fortunes don't lie with France. But for most of the Napoleonic period that, folks tend to wargame, this is the one. It's very rare that I'll say, this is the book you want, but that's why I'm saying it so stridently this time. This has got everything in here, and this is the sort of information which is available online in other sources, but having it all here is just fabulous. All of the color plates, regimental facings, buttons, details like that, light infantry companies, dragoons, it's all in here. So very, very worthwhile picking up. Can be a little bit tricky to find depending on where you are, but be vigilant, rely on a little bit of Google foo, you will find it. And the English translation is very good. Now this fella here has volunteered to be our victim for today. He is a 3D print from Piano Wargames. Does absolutely beautiful miniatures, by the by, but you can also get them in white metal, so if you don't have a printer, you're not going to miss out. Wherever you get them from though, I've gone ahead and started off by priming them with a spray of matte white from the Army Painter. Now ordinarily I'd give you 3 or 4 different alternatives, but white is white. Since we're going to be using predominantly very light colors, just start from white. It will really make things easier. What I'm going to start with is his skin though, because we want to paint from parts which are going to be difficult to reach later, and then sort of paint outwards. So I'm going to begin here. This is Cadian Fleshtone, and it covers pretty well, but it will go a little bit streaky as it dries, so you're probably going to need to give it a second coat. Now we're going to swap on over to a few contrast colors. Now it doesn't need to be contrast specifically, it can also be speed paint or express, any of these dipping ink style stuff that there is out there. I'm just painting what I am painting to match what I've already done as much as possible. So I have here Imperial Fist, because these guys, I believe, without doxing myself, I think this is the regiment that was based out of Regensburg and was closest to where I live at the moment, so it's kind of cool. I'm going to paint over all of his facings with this. So try not to hit the white stuff if you can avoid it. But buttons and what have you, just go straight over the top. It won't matter. Now, as I'm going between these colors, I am actually swapping between a couple of different brushes here. For anything which is precise, where I want to be able to put things in exactly the right place, what I'm using here is the speed paint brush from the Army Painter. A very, very pointed tip. It does have a tiny wee hook at the end. They haven't really... the bionic bristles they talk about, they are actually quite a lot better than a lot of the synthetic brushes I've used, but it's still that tiny hook. But I've actually found that really useful for getting into certain areas. For other larger areas, I've got just a synthetic brush that I found online. It's relatively cheap, and it spreads a little bit more. You'll see it's not quite as fine a tip at all, but that's quite handy for some of what we're going to be doing. So, for example, where I want to be able to put on quite a bit at once, what I have here is Gore-Grunta Fur, and I'm going to go over the musket with this. And I'm also going to use this on his backpack. And for the roll on the back of his pack there, I'm going to use Basilicanum grey. If you can avoid the white straps at this point, go ahead and try to. It will make tidy up later on a little bit easier. Now for the satchel, he's got slung over on his left side here. What I have is Skeleton Horde. I'm going to apply this fairly quickly on the satchel itself. And then I find it easiest to tip these guys upside down and work from the opposite direction, so I can drag my brush relatively smoothly over the strap that's holding that on. And I have already made a dreadful mess, but hey ho. Now with Blood Angels Red, I'm going to paint this fella's piping. Of course it might be different depending on which regiment you're painting, so make sure to refer to your reading. Now I'm doing this as a slightly different step because in the painting guide that I'm kind of borrowing a lot of this from, this is done almost as a final step, but I tend to find it easier to do it now while I've still got the blue of the uniform to go over top. And when you come up to the epaulettes, it pays to be a little careful with how it's going on, but like I said, with the acrylic blue going over top, you're going to be able to clean up any mistakes relatively easily. Now at this point is where you might start running into little overspills and what have you. Particularly for the yellow, I tend to find demonic yellow works really well as a tidy up for that. Hopefully you shouldn't need it. Now what I've got here is Cygor brown, and I'm going to use this in two places. First of all, the strap which is holding his canteen, and I want to be pretty careful with this if I can. And once I'm done with this, I'm also going to use it to paint the strap holding his helmet on. Now comes a bit where a lot of this is going to come into context. What I have here, this is Imperial Navy from the Army Painter. I was using previously Prussian Blue from Vallejo, but I spilled that pot and managed to completely gum up the top, so pretty close. And in fact, might even be a better Bavarian Blue. Imperial Navy is going to do the job. So I'm still using that number 3, that speed paint brush here, because the tip, like I mentioned, kind of lets me jab into some corners relatively easily. So for example, on a sleeve here, let's get them upside down. If I poke into the corner with the tip of the brush and then drag away, less chance of me hitting anything that I want to stay white or red or yellow, whatever the case may be. Now that is a really nice blue. I think that looks great. It will need a second coat over the sleeves in order to solidify that, but nice and easy there. Now, I don't 100% remember the gold color that I used for the gold bits. I'm pretty sure it's what I've got here. This is Liberator Gold, which is really more of a light, almost brassy sort of color. So what I'll do is base coat this gold stuff now. And on this fella, because of the regiment he's with, I will be painting his buttons in the same. Now if you want a darker colour for some of the brass or gold fittings, what you can use instead would be Retributor Armour. And that's what I'm going to use here on his hanger. Okay, we're getting there now. What I have is Iron Hand Steel, and no great surprise, I'm going to paint this over all of the metallic stuff. So here's musket, and as well, the canteen that he's carrying on this side, this bit will be steel too. Now we move on at last to the last of our base coats, and it is actually black. Now I've mentioned all the time that it is rare that I will use a true black on a miniature. I tend to prefer using a very dark grey, because black can by itself look a little bit cartoonish. But on these guys, it looks so cool. You know, I like leaning into very slightly the toy soldier look. So anywhere that's going to be black, his cartridge box here, for example, the case for his hanger and his bayonet, and as well, the funky Raupenhelm. Now, the reason why I'm doing this now is that I can use the solid black paint, the acrylic, to kind of come in here and tidy up some of the gold details that we've laid the base coats down for. This will be a lot easier without a camera in front of me, but just to demonstrate that it can be done. While I'm here, I'm just going to blacken his hair as well, You can pick any old colour you fancy for that though. Alright, and there's my dude more or less. If you want to get a guy on the table really quickly, you could just shade him from here, but what I am going to do is a tiny bit of tidy up. I'm going to go back to that Liberator Gold and tidy up some of the lacing here. I find it's easier to do the gold first over the white, then black it in, and then tidy up the gold, rather than painting the whole thing black, and then essentially a light gold color like this. You know, it's almost a yellow, so you're trying to paint 2 or 3 coats straight and careful over black. And yeah, that's the hard way. So I'm doing it this way instead. Now, as I'm mucking around here tidying up, I'm going to talk about how I'm going to shade him. Now, because this fella is going to join miniatures that I have already painted, I'm going to shade him using the same marine juice mix that I did for the other guys. Now, that is the classic marine juice, if you will, which means what it is a bottle each of the old known oil, which unfortunately you can't get anymore, Reichland Flesh Shade, and Lamian Medium. Now, Lamian Medium now being in the larger bottles means it works out at a ratio of 3:3:4, so slightly more in the way of medium. Now, I've got a couple of recipes for it in the description. There is a pure army painter mix if you fancy. There's one that uses the mostly Citadel but swaps out new known oil for dark tone instead. It's really up to you, whatever you can get your hands on and what you like the look of. But because, as I said, I am painting to match something I've already done, I'm kind of scuppered in what to use here. All the same, won't take me a second to mix some of that up. So, the $64,000 question. Why am I using this stuff at all? Why not just Agrax Earthshade or similar? Well, the reason being is because this has got so much medium in it, it's not going to stain the flatter areas of the miniature as much as a neat shade would. And the reason why the mix of colors matters as much as it does is, as you see going on, it has this very slight warmth to it. So I'm not applying very much. You see, as I go over an area, once it collects, I'll shift it around with my brush, very smoothly moving it in the same direction as much as possible so it collects down at the bottom. But there's a slight reddish tint to it. It works over blue, works over red, green it even works over. I've tried that in the past. But yeah, marine juice is just a nice soft, it's not yellow like most soft tones or Seraphim Sepia tend to be, but there is enough oomph to it that you do get some lovely quick shading. So I'm going to go over the entire miniature with this, and once he is dried, we'll get a look at what that looks like. So nice smooth motions, don't let it pull too heavily anywhere, away we go. Then once that is dried, he's done. I reckon you could put him on the table quite happily like that. Varnish him, base him, call him done. Well, he's not quite dry in the corner there yet, but you see what I mean about how the shading is subtle enough, it's not overwhelming, but there's definitely enough there to work. What I am going to do, and what I recommend for like dudes who are going to be standing in the front rank of your regiments, is a few little highlights. And I'm going to start first of all with some matte white. I don't want to do very much of this, just a bit to brighten up some of the shape of his trousers, particularly anywhere that you've ended with maybe a slightly funky drying pattern. You can just blast along with a wee bit of white and straighten that up. Same too as cross belts, just a little bit there will look brilliant. Now that is relatively subtle on camera, as it is in real life to be honest. What I'm going to use next is some Regal Blue, and I'm going to use this to highlight, I'll let you guess, the blue. So, I don't want to add very much of this, because it will very quickly overpower and brighten this blue, but just on some of the creases and folds, just enough to give it a little bit of pop. Now in the realm of not strictly necessary, but will look cool, what I have here is Ice Yellow, again from the Army Painter. I'm going to do just a little bit of this in some of the creases on the yellow parts. And now if you have chosen another color for your regimental facings, honestly, just eyeball it. You know, we're dealing with uniforms that are almost 200 years old, nobody's going to get cross, or rather they shouldn't do, if you haven't painted them 100% accurately. Now on the red, I have pure red, and this is actually not that much brighter. I would suggest if you want a really sharp red highlight, then legendary red might be a better choice here. But what I want to do is just to brighten up some of the edges a little and make that color really just more vibrant. So it's not much of a highlight. So it isn't genuinely much of a highlight, but it is going to solidify that color a little and will look quite nice when it's done. Then a final stage, of course, will be his skin. Now, if you want to, you can go back over most of the skin with Cadian Fleshtone first, but because with the marine juice, we're not really not making it all that much darker, what I'm going to do is go straight here to Kislev Flesh. And what I'm doing is concentrating on high points of the face. So his chin, shape of his face, those gaunt cheeks. These are wonderful to paint. I love these faces. Then finally on his face, really just nose, chin, and cheekbones. What I have is some flayed one flesh. This is where we're really pushing the shape of his face. As well, just on the very backs of his knuckles. Alright, now the very last thing to do is to take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish. You could highlight a couple of other things, like even the black on his helmet, for example. Maybe a very light dry brush of a grey or something over the Raupenhelm kind of puffy bit. But it's up to you. I think there does come a point of diminishing returns, especially when you want to be painting a lot of these guys for your army. So yeah, let's go ahead, base him. The recipe for that will be in the description, same as always. Let's get a look at what he looks like once he's all finished. And so, there at last, our Bavarian is complete to join the rest of his friends. And as they're whizzing around, I just want to venture, can you actually tell which is the one that I had painted today? Because mentioning that I was going to paint the jackets differently, I'm myself actually struggling to see a difference. When they come around again, you'll see he is the fella who hasn't got any dirt on his trousers. So, something to keep an eye on there. For the dirt, I did add just a little bit of the brown sand from the basing. Popped that on a scraggly old brush and just dabbed it on some of their trousers. Here he is. It's something that you can do if you want to make them look a little more lived in. Not a necessity, and I think I might have overdone it in some cases, which is why I decided not to do it on the fella from today. Now, the method itself isn't all that difficult. It's a little bit fiddly, just owing to the number of small bits that these guys have on them. But all the same, as long as you go slow and remember when to come back and fix any little mistakes, you'll be golden. So as always, thanks very much goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. I mean it every time, and I also say that every time. So yeah, I do mean it. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.